Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where ordinary people step into extraordinary darkness. Tonight we travel to Alaska, a land where the sky burns green and the ground swallows sound. There's something about the endless nights here. The isolation, the storms, the quiet roads that lead nowhere, that breed stories you can't quite shake off. What you're about to hear are real accounts and bone-deep legends from those who survived them, and from some who didn't. Make sure you subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next time the dark calls. Pull up your hood, take a deep breath, because once we start, the cold takes hold, and it's hard to get warm again. Story 1. Man in the parking garage. I saw the same car following 3 different women in the Anchorage mall parking garage, and by the time I realized what I was witnessing, it was already too late for one of them. My name is Derek Sullivan, and in 1987 I was working security at the Northway Mall in Anchorage, Alaska. Not the glamorous kind of security you see in movies. Just a guy in a cheap uniform doing foot patrols, checking doors, dealing with shoplifters. The pay was terrible, but the hours were flexible, perfect for putting myself through community college. Winter in Anchorage means darkness. Real darkness. By mid-December, the sun rises around 10 a.m. and sets by 3:30 p.m. That leaves 20 hours of night. 20 hours where the massive parking garages attached to shopping centers become caves of concrete and shadow. 20 hours where anything can happen and nobody sees. I was doing my evening rounds on December 8th when I noticed the car. A dark blue Chevy Impala, maybe 10 years old, parked on the 3rd level of the garage. Nothing unusual about it except the driver never got out. He just sat there, engine off, lights off. I could see the silhouette of his head through the windshield. Perfectly still, watching the entrance to the mall. I made a mental note and continued my patrol. When I came back 40 minutes later, the car had moved. Different spot on the same level. Still occupied. Still watching. That got my attention. I approached casually, tried to see the license plate. The driver started his engine immediately, pulled out and drove away before I got close enough to read the numbers. Not speeding, not panicking, just leaving with the calm efficiency of someone who knew he had been spotted. I reported it to my supervisor. He shrugged it off. Said people wait for friends all the time. Said maybe the guy was early for picking someone up. Said I was being paranoid. But something felt wrong. The way the car had moved the instant I showed interest. The way the driver sat so still. Like a predator waiting. 3 nights later, I saw the same car. Same level. Different spot. This time I watched it from a distance. Used the concrete pillars for cover. The driver sat motionless for over an hour. Then a woman walked out of the mall entrance. Mid-30s, carrying shopping bags. She went to her car, 2 rows away from the Impala. As she loaded her bags into her trunk, the Impala's headlights came on. The engine started. The car began moving slowly, following the lane toward her position. The woman got into her car, started backing out. The Impala waited. She drove toward the exit ramp. The Impala followed, maintaining distance. Not obvious, just another car leaving the mall. But I had been watching. I had seen the pattern, the waiting, the targeting, the following. I ran to my patrol vehicle, a beat-up Ford pickup the mall provided. Tried to catch up. By the time I reached the exit, both cars were gone. I got a partial plate on the Impala. Enough to file a report with Anchorage PD. The officer who took my statement was polite but dismissive. Said following someone in a parking garage was not a crime. Said unless something actually happened, there was nothing they could do. I started keeping detailed logs. Every time I saw the Impala. Every time the pattern repeated. Over the next 2 weeks, I documented 6 incidents. Always the same car. Always the same behavior. Wait, watch, follow. Different women each time. Different times. But always during the darkness. Always when the garage was at its emptiest. On December 23rd, the pattern broke. I was doing a late patrol around 11 p.m. The mall was closed, but the garage stayed open for movie theater patrons. I found the Impala on level 4, parked, empty. That had never happened before. The driver always stayed with the vehicle. I checked the interior with my flashlight. Nothing visible. Just an old car with worn seats and trash on the floor. But the hood was warm. Recently driven. I heard a sound. A muffled scream, coming from the stairwell. I ran toward it. The door to the stairs was propped open with a brick. I went through. The stairwell was concrete, fluorescent lights, echoing. I could hear struggling above me. 2nd floor. I took the stairs 2 at a time. Found them on the landing between floors. The driver had a woman pinned against the wall. One hand over her mouth, the other pulling at her purse. She was fighting, kicking. He was bigger, stronger, focused entirely on subduing her. I shouted. He looked up. For a moment, I saw his face clearly under the harsh lights. Ordinary, completely ordinary. Brown hair, average build, maybe 40 years old. The kind of face you would forget 5 minutes after seeing it. Nothing threatening, nothing memorable. Just a normal guy who happened to be attacking a woman in a stairwell. He released her and ran up the stairs toward the higher levels. The woman collapsed. I helped her up, asked if she was hurt. She was shaking, crying, but physically unharmed. I called it in. APD responded fast this time. Interviewed her, interviewed me, searched the garage, found nothing. The Impala was gone. The man had vanished. The woman, his story was terrifying. She had been walking to her car when she noticed someone following her. She changed direction. He matched her movements. She started walking faster. He maintained pace. She decided to take the stairs instead of the elevator, thinking the enclosed space of an elevator was more dangerous. He followed her into the stairwell, grabbed her before she could reach her floor. She said he did not speak, did not threaten, just grabbed her with mechanical efficiency, like he had done it before, many times before. She was certain if I had not appeared, she would have disappeared. Just another missing person. Another statistic in a winter that was seeing an unusual number of women vanishing from Anchorage parking areas. That last part made my blood freeze. I had not been following the news closely. I asked the responding officer about other disappearances. He hesitated, then admitted there were 4 open cases, 4 women who had vanished from mall parking areas over the past 3 months. No witnesses, no evidence, just women who walked into parking garages and never came out. The cases were connected unofficially. The pattern was obvious, but without evidence, without witnesses, the investigation was stalled. I gave them everything. My logs, the partial plate, descriptions of the car and driver. They ran the plate, came back registered to a vehicle reported stolen 6 months earlier. Dead end. They circulated the description, got nowhere. The driver, his ordinary appearance was a curse. He looked like 10,000 other men in Anchorage. I became obsessed, started spending off-duty hours watching the garage, watching other mall garages around the city. I saw the Impala twice more, once at the Diamond Center, once at the University Center. Same behavior, same pattern. Wait, watch, follow. But now he was more careful, stayed farther back, never parked long, always moving before anyone could approach. On January 7th, 1988, they found a body. A woman who had been missing since November, found in the wilderness east of Anchorage. Frozen. The state medical examiner determined she had been dead for approximately 2 months. Cause of death was exposure and dehydration, but there were marks on her wrists and ankles. Ligature marks. She had been restrained, held somewhere, then dumped in the wilderness to die. The timeline matched. She disappeared from a mall parking garage the same week I first spotted the Impala. The connection seemed obvious, but there was no physical evidence linking her death to the man I had seen. No fibers, no DNA. This was 1988. Forensic technology was limited, and the body had been exposed to elements for months. 3 more bodies were found over the next year. All women. All missing from parking areas. All showing signs of restraint before death. The pattern was undeniable. Anchorage had a predator. Someone who used the long winter darkness and the isolated parking garages to hunt. Someone who was patient, methodical. Someone who understood that in a city where everyone was bundled in winter gear, where parking garages had no security cameras, where darkness lasted 20 hours a day, a man could become invisible. The Impala vanished after January. Either the driver switched vehicles or stopped operating in Anchorage. The attacks stopped. The disappearances stopped, but the cases were never solved. 4 confirmed victims, possibly more. And the man who did it simply melted back into normal life. Went back to being ordinary, forgettable, invisible. I quit security work 6 months later. Could not handle the parking garages anymore. Every car with a lone driver. Every woman walking alone. Every shadow. They all carried weight. All represented potential danger I could not prevent. I moved to Seattle in 1990. Put Alaska behind me. But I still think about that case. About the man in the Impala. About his ordinary face. About how easily he vanished. I started following news from other cities. Looking for similar patterns. Disappearances from parking areas. Women found dead in wilderness. Predators who operated in darkness and isolation. I found them. Lots of them. Cases in Portland. In Spokane. In Boise. Same pattern. Different cities. Different years. All unsolved. All featuring predators who used parking garages and winter darkness. And I wondered if it was the same man. If he moved from city to city. If he was still out there. Still hunting. Last month I saw something that brought it all back. I was leaving a mall in downtown Seattle. Walking through the parking garage. I saw a car. Dark sedan. Parked. Occupied. Driver sitting perfectly still, watching the mall entrance. I froze, watched him. 20 minutes later, a woman walked out, got in her car, the sedan, its lights came on. It began following her toward the exit. I got the plate this time. Full plate, called it into Seattle PD. They ran it, came back clean, registered to a local resident. No warrants, no record. When they contacted him, he said he was waiting to pick up his wife. She confirmed it. He was innocent, just a husband waiting in a parking garage. But I know what I saw. The stillness, the watching, the following. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I've become paranoid after decades of carrying that case. Or maybe predators are everywhere. Maybe the man in the Impala was not unique. Maybe parking garages in every city have watchers. Patient men who understand that darkness and isolation create opportunities. That in the time it takes to walk from a mall entrance to a car, anything can happen. That most people never notice, never see the pattern until it is too late. I still go to malls, still park in garages, but I am always aware now, always watching, looking for cars that sit too long, drivers who watch too carefully, women who walk alone and do not notice they are being followed. And sometimes I wonder if the man I interrupted in that stairwell in 1987 still thinks about me. About the security guard who saw him, who chased him, who almost caught him, or if he forgot me 5 minutes later. Just another obstacle, another close call in a career of hunting that probably started long before Anchorage and continues somewhere else. Somewhere with parking garages and winter darkness and women who just want to get home safely but never do. Because invisible predators are the most dangerous kind. The ones who look ordinary. Who blend in. Who understand that the best camouflage is not hiding in shadows but standing in plain sight, looking like everyone else, waiting patiently for the right moment to strike. Story 2. Tundra vampire. The blood in the snow was black under my headlamp, and the tracks leading away from it weren't too human. My name is Michael Torres, and I am a field technician for an oil company working on the north slope of Alaska. What I'm about to tell you happened last winter, during the polar night, when the sun doesn't to rise for 65 days straight. When darkness becomes something you wear like a second skin. When isolation stops being a condition and becomes a state of mind. When things that shouldn't to exist find it easier to move among us. I was stationed at a remote pumping station 40 miles from the nearest village. Just me and 2 other technicians, rotating 12-hour shifts, keeping equipment running through temperatures that regularly hit 40 below. We'd been there for 3 weeks when Danny March disappeared. Danny had the night shift, midnight to noon, though noon and midnight looked exactly the same in late December. He was supposed to check the perimeter alarms, inspect the generators, monitor pressure readings. Routine stuff. At 04 hours, his shift supervisor tried to radio him. No response. Cameras showed him leaving the main building at 0330, heading toward generator 3. He never came back. We found his park at 20 yards from the building, just lying in the snow. No tears. No blood, no sign of struggle, like he'd taken it off voluntarily in 40 below weather and walked away. His radio was still clipped to the collar. His gloves were still in the pockets. But Danny was gone. The search team arrived from Deadhorse the next day. 8 men with dogs and thermal imaging equipment. They found nothing. No body, no trail, just that abandoned parka and a lot of questions nobody wanted to answer. The company wrote it off as exposure and disorientation. Said Danny must have gotten confused, wandered onto the tundra, and succumbed to the cold. They shipped his belongings to his family and brought in a replacement technician. That replacement was Trevor Kunuk, an Inupiat man from Utqiagvik. He was in his 50s, quiet and serious. He worked the slope for 30 years and had seen everything the Arctic could throw at a person. But when he arrived and heard about Danny, something changed in his face. A look I see a lot in the coming weeks. Recognition and fear. Trevor pulled me aside on his second night, asked if Danny had been acting strange before he disappeared, if he complained about nightmares or seeing things, if he mentioned feeling watched. I told him no. Danny had been fine, normal, maybe a little homesick, but that was standard out here. Trevor just nodded slowly and told me to be careful during the dark hours, to never go outside alone, to trust my instincts if something felt wrong. When I asked why, he told me about the Mahaha. That's what the Inupiat call it. The tundra vampire, a shapeshifter that hunts during the polar night. It appears as someone you know, someone you trust. It calls to you in familiar voices, lures you away from safety. Then it feeds, not just on blood, but on warmth, on life itself. It leaves its victims frozen and drained, their faces locked in expressions of laughter. Because the mahaha tickles its prey to death before feeding. A grotesque parody of joy marking the moment of ultimate terror. I heard the legend before. Thought it was just folklore. Stories told to keep children from wandering off in the dark. But Trevor wasn't telling it like a story. He was telling it like a warning. Like something that had happened. Was still happening. Would happen again if we weren't. Be careful. 3 nights later, I saw Danny. I was doing my rounds at O2Rs, checking the eastern perimeter. My headlamp caught movement near the fence line. A figure standing in the darkness just beyond the lights. Wearing a parka, watching me. I called out. The figure waved, started walking toward me. As it got closer, I recognized the walk. The build, the face illuminated by my lamp. It was Danny Marsh. Same dark beard, same crooked smile, same everything. He looked cold and tired but alive. He told me he'd gotten lost. Had been wandering the tundra for days. Had finally found his way back. Asked if I could help him inside. Get him warm. Get him food. His voice was Danny's voice. His mannerisms were Danny's mannerisms. Everything about him was perfect. Except his eyes. When my headlamp hit them straight on, they reflected light. Like an animal's eyes. Like a cat or a wolf caught in headlights. Human eyes done to do that. I took a step back. Danny, his smile widened. Too wide. Stretching his face in ways that weren't quite right. He took a step forward. Asked why I was backing away. Asked if something was wrong. His voice was still Danny. But there was something underneath it now. Something cold and ancient and hungry. I ran, sprinted back to the main building. Slammed through the door. Hit the alarm. Trevor and the other technician, a guy named Rodriguez, came running. I told them Danny was outside. That something was pretending to be Danny. That we needed to lock down immediately. Trevor didn't. He questioned it. Just started sealing doors and windows. Rodriguez thought I was crazy until we checked the cameras. Danny was standing outside the main entrance. Just standing there in the darkness. Staring at the door. Not moving. Not shivering despite the cold. After 10 minutes, he walked to the nearest window and pressed his face against the glass. His breath didn't defog it. His skin showed no signs of frostbite despite bare hands and no hood. He smiled at the camera and mouthed words. Come outside. It's warm out here. You don't need to be afraid. We watched him on the monitors for 3 hours. He walked around the building. Tried every door. Every window. Sometimes he looked like Danny. Sometimes his proportions seemed off. Arms too long. Fingers too thin. Face too flat. Like something wearing a Danny suit that didn't quite fit right. At 053Rs, he stopped trying to get in. Just stood in the middle of the compound and stared at the main building. Then he opened his mouth. Wider than any human mouth should open. And screamed. The sound didn't come through the walls. Didn't. It was inside my head. A high-pitched wail that felt like ice picks in my brain. All 3 of us doubled over. Covered our ears. It did nothing. The scream was coming from inside. When it finally stopped, Danny was gone. Just vanished from the camera feeds. No footprints leading away. No sign he'd ever been there. Trevor explained what we were dealing with. The mahaha doesn't just kill. It studies, learns, takes the form of its victims and uses them as lures for the next target. Danny wasn't Danny anymore. He was bait. The thing had taken his form. His memories. His voice. It would use him to get to us. And if it succeeded, it would take our forms too. Add us to its collection. Use us to lure others. The company refused to evacuate us. Said we were experiencing group hysteria. Stress from isolation and darkness. They sent a counselor instead of a rescue team. A psychologist from Anchorage who arrived via helicopter and spent 6 hours telling us our fears were manifestations of seasonal affective disorder and cabin fever. Then night came. The psychologist, Dr. Sarah Chen, went to the bathroom and didn't come back. We found the bathroom window open. She climbed out. Her coat was still hanging by the door. Her boots were still in her room. The cameras showed her walking out into the tundra in just her pants and sweater. Walking purposefully, like she was being called, like she was following someone we couldn't see. The temperature was 43 below zero. She was gone within minutes. After that, the company took us seriously. They sent a helicopter at first light, which meant 1,100 hours in late December. We had to survive until then. Had to stay inside, stay together, not trust anything we saw or heard, not respond to familiar voices calling from outside, not believe anyone who came to the doors claiming to need help. The attacks started at 08 hours. Dr. Chen appeared at the east window. She looked frozen but alive, begged us to let her in, said she was hypothermic, dying. Needed help immediately. Her face was blue. Her lips were black. Frost covered her hair. She looked exactly like someone who had been outside for hours in deadly cold. But her eyes reflected light. And when we didn't respond, her expression changed. The desperation dropped away. Something else looked out through Dr. Chen's face. Something that was annoyed we weren't falling for the trick. Then Danny appeared at another window. Then Dr. Chen was at the door. Then both of them were on the roof. We could hear them up there, walking around, scratching at the ventilation ducts, trying to find a way in. They called to us in perfect voices, used personal details they shouldn't know, described memories they shouldn't have. Rodriguez, his daughter, his name. Trevor, his mother, his maiden name. My ex-wife, his favorite restaurant. Private things, intimate things, things the real Danny and Dr. Chen couldn't have known. It wasn't just mimicking them. It was reading us, pulling information from our minds, learning what would hurt most, what would be most convincing, what would make us open that door. At 09:03 hours, my mother appeared outside. She'd been dead for 6 years. But there she was, looking exactly like she had before the cancer took her, calling my name, asking why I wouldn't help her, saying she was cold, saying she missed me, saying she just wanted to see me one more time. I almost opened the door. Trevor grabbed me, held me back, reminded me it wasn't real, wasn't to her, was something wearing her face like a mask, something that would kill me the moment I stepped outside. I broke down, cried, watching my dead mother stand in the darkness and beg me to let her in. Knowing it was a monster, knowing I couldn't help her, knowing she wasn't really there. It was the cruelest thing I'd ever experienced. The helicopter arrived at 1,103 hours. We ran for it the moment it touched down. Didn't look back. Didn't check to see if anything followed us. Just got in and got out. As we lifted off, I looked down at the compound. Saw figures standing in the snow. Danny, Dr. Chen, my mother, others I didn't recognize. All staring up at us. All smiling. All waving goodbye. The company abandoned the station. Said it was due to budget cuts, but everyone knew the truth. They couldn't keep people there. Not during the dark months. Not with that thing hunting. I quit 2 weeks later. Moved to Phoenix, somewhere the sun always shines. Somewhere the nights are short and warm and full of light. But I still see them sometimes. In crowds. In reflections. Danny, his face in a stranger. Dr. Chen at a crosswalk. My mother in a parking lot. Just for a second. Just long enough to make my heart stop. Then they gone. Just normal people going about normal lives. Trevor told me before I left that the Mahaha doesn't forget. Once it has tasted you, once it has learned your shape, you remarked. It might not come for you right away, might wait years, but eventually, when you alone in the dark, when you vulnerable and tired, you'll hear it. A familiar voice, a loved one calling, someone you trust asking for help, and you'll have to decide if it's real or if it's the thing from the tundra. The shapeshifter, the vampire, the Mahaha, still hunting, still learning, still wearing the faces of everyone it has taken, still hungry for warmth in the endless Arctic night. I think about Danny a lot. Wonder if any part of him is still in there, still aware, trapped inside whatever that thing is, watching himself be used as bait, as a lure, as a trap. I hope not. I hope death was quick and final, because the alternative is worse than anything I can imagine. Being conscious but not in control, being alive but not living, being used as a puppet by something that feeds on human warmth and leaves only frozen laughter behind. Story 3. Frost scratches. I need to tell you about something that happened to me in Alaska, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to say is real. Because for 17 years, I've told myself it was the cold, the isolation, the darkness doing things to my mind. But last month, I saw those same patterns again. Here, in Phoenix, 2,000 miles from where it all began. It started in February of 1979, outside Fairbanks. I was 9 years old. My father had taken a job with the pipeline, and we moved into a rental house about 15 miles outside town. The kind of place that looked like it had been dropped onto the permafrost and forgotten. 2 stories. Brown siding, surrounded by black spruce trees that never moved, even in the wind. My mother hated it immediately. She said the house felt watched. The storm hit on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd been counting down to the weekend, to anything that might break up the monotony of that endless winter. The forecast called for heavy snow, nothing unusual. But by Wednesday morning, the world had disappeared. White static pressed against every window. The power lines came down around noon, and just like that, we were alone in the dark. My father got the wood stove going. We had enough supplies for 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we were careful. The battery radio said crews were working to restore power, but the storm kept getting worse. They were calling it historic. Record snowfall. Record cold. The kind of cold that makes the trees explode in the night. Sap freezing and expanding until the trunks split with sounds like rifle shots. That first night without power, I heard the whispers. I was in bed, buried under every blanket we owned, listening to the wind tear at the house. Except beneath that howling, there was something else. Voices. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, speaking just below the threshold of understanding. At first, I thought it was the storm playing tricks, air rushing through gaps in the walls, creating phantom speech. But these whispers had rhythm. They had intention. I climbed out of bed and pressed my ear against the cold glass of my window. The whispers grew louder, competing with the wind, almost drowning it out. I could make out individual threads in the chorus now, weaving in and out of each other. Some sounded like warnings, others like invitations. Then I saw the patterns in the frost. They covered the entire inside of the window, intricate geometric designs that looked almost mathematical. Not the random fern-like crystals that frost usually makes, but deliberate symbols arranged in precise spirals and grids. They were beautiful and completely wrong, like crop circles made by something that understood our mathematics but came from somewhere else. I called for my parents. My father came first, flashlight beam cutting through the dark hallway. He stopped in my doorway and went very still. I remember the way the light shook in his hand, casting the frost patterns in sharp relief. My mother appeared behind him, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. "It's just frost," my father said, but his voice had no conviction. We checked the other windows. Every single pane of glass in the house was covered. The same complex patterns, the same impossible precision. And the whispers continued, rising and falling like breathing. My mother wanted to leave, pack up the car and drive into town, storm or no storm. But my father pointed out what we all knew. In that cold, in that wind, we wouldn't make it half a mile. The house was our only option. We would wait out the storm together, and when the power came back on, when the roads cleared, we would leave and never come back. That was the first night. The second night, the patterns changed. I woke to find new designs covering the windows, more elaborate than before. These looked organic, like neural networks or root systems, branching and connecting in ways that hurt to follow. I traced one line with my finger, careful not to touch the glass, and felt a headache bloom behind my eyes. The pattern seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at it, restructuring itself just outside my peripheral vision. The whispers were louder now, clear enough that I could almost make out words. They seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, from the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. My father spent that day rechecking every window, every door, looking for drafts that might explain the voices. He found nothing. The house was sealed tight against the cold. That night, my mother started marking the walls. She used a pencil, drawing small crosses on every surface. Protection symbols, she said, though I'd never known her to be religious. My father didn't to stop her. I think we all felt the same desperate need to do something, anything, to push back against what was happening. The crosses didn't help. On the third night, I found my father standing at the living room window, flashlight off, staring at the frost patterns in the moonlight. I'd come downstairs for water and found him there, perfectly still, his breath making small clouds in the frigid air. The wood stove had gone out hours ago. "Dad?" I said. He didn't respond. I moved closer and saw his eyes tracking back and forth across the patterns, following pathways I couldn't see. His lips were moving, forming words in sync with the whispers that filled the house. "Dad!" I grabbed his arm, and he jerked like I'd burned him. For a moment, he looked at me without recognition. Then his face crumpled, and he pulled me into a crushing hug. He was shaking. This man who worked roughneck jobs, who survived a tour in Vietnam, who I'd never seen show fear, was shaking like a child. "Don, look at them," he whispered. "Don, try to understand them. That's what it wants." We woke my mother. The three of us huddled on the couch, wrapped in blankets, flashlight between us like a campfire. None of us slept. The whispers grew so loud they shook the windows, and the frost patterns spread beyond the glass. We watched them creep across the walls, following the pencil crosses my mother had drawn, incorporating them into larger designs. The fourth night, my mother disappeared. Not literally, she was still in the house, still moving through rooms, but something fundamental had changed. She spoke in a monotone, her words flat and empty. She stopped eating. She stood at windows for hours, tracing the frost patterns with her fingernails. And when she did, the whispers would quiet, as if listening to her responses. My father tried to reach her, shaking her shoulders, shouting her name. She would look at him with eyes that seemed too dark, pupils swallowing the iris, and ask in that dead voice why he was so upset. Everything was fine. Everything was exactly as it should be. I was terrified of her. More terrified than I was of the whispers or the patterns or the suffocating dark. Because whatever was in the house hadn't broken her. It had changed her, rewritten something essential. On the fifth night, I made my decision. While my father slept, exhausted from days of fear and vigilance, I crept down to the kitchen. I found my mother standing at the sink, finger dragging through frost on the window above it. The whispers were deafening now, 1,000 voices all speaking different words in perfect harmony. "What do you want?" I asked. She turned to me, and in the flashlight beam, I could see frost patterns spreading across her skin. Tiny geometric designs creeping up her neck, across her cheeks, spiraling toward her eyes. "To show you," she said in that terrible flat voice. "To teach you, to bring you through." "Through where?" She smiled, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. "Through the cold, through the dark, to where they'd always been waiting." I ran, up the stairs, into my room, slamming the door behind me. I pushed my dresser against it and climbed into bed, pulling blankets over my head like they could protect me from anything. The whispers followed, seeping through walls and floor, and I could hear my mother's footsteps on the stairs. Slow, patient, inevitable. She stopped outside my door. "It doesn't hurt," she said. "The cold is a gift. The dark is a door. Let us in. And I'll never be afraid again." I pressed my hands over my ears and screamed until my throat was raw. Do you know how long I stayed like that? Hours, maybe. When I finally emerged, the house was silent. Not peaceful silent, empty silent. The kind of silence that comes when something is holding its breath. The power came back on at dawn. Lights blazing, furnace roaring to life, the hum of electricity flooding the house with normal sounds. The whispers stopped so abruptly it felt like a physical shock. I stumbled downstairs to find my father in the kitchen, coffee brewing, acting like nothing had happened. My mother was at the table, eating toast, her skin clear and normal. They didn't remember any of it. Not the whispers, not the patterns, not the 5 days of terror. When I tried to tell them, they looked at me with concern and talked about how isolation and darkness could play tricks on young minds. My father said he heard me having nightmares. My mother suggested I'd been sleepwalking. But I went to the windows, and the frost patterns were still there, fading as warmth returned to the house, but visible enough, proof that I hadn't imagined it. I took a camera and photographed every single window. We left that house 2 days later. My father quit his pipeline job, and we moved to Oregon. I spent years trying to forget, trying to convince myself it had been some kind of shared delusion brought on by extreme conditions. I threw away the photographs in college. I built a normal life in a warm climate, as far from Alaska as I could manage. Then last month, I woke at 3 in the morning to find frost patterns on my bedroom window. In Phoenix, in August, on glass that was 70 degrees warm to the touch. The same spirals, the same impossible geometry, and beneath the hum of my air conditioner, I could hear them. The whispers, they'd been waiting. 17 years in the cold and the dark, waiting for me to forget enough, to feel safe enough. And now they were back. And this time there was no storm to blame it on, no isolation to explain it away. I'm telling you this because the patterns are spreading. They're on my bathroom mirror now. My car windows, the screen of my phone when it is turned off. And the whispers are teaching me their language, whether I want to learn it or not. Soon I'll understand what they were saying. Soon I'll know what they wanted to show my mother, what door they wanted to bring her through. Soon the frost will spread across my skin. And I'll smile that sad smile, and I'll be patient. Because the cold isn't weather, It's alive. It's aware. And it remembers everyone who has ever heard it whisper, if you wake one night to find frost where frost shouldn't to be, done, to look at the patterns. Don, to try to understand them. And whatever you do, Don, to ask what they want. Because they'll tell you. And once you really understand, you will never be warm again. Story 4. Shifting wreck. The GPS said the ship shouldn't to exist. More than that, it said the ship couldn't to exist. Not where we were seeing it, not moving the way it was moving. But I was looking right at it through my binoculars, a 19th century whaling vessel locked in pack ice that had melted 3 weeks ago. And I knew that everything I thought I understood about the Northwest Passage was wrong. My name is David Marsh, and I've been a marine surveyor for 17 years. I map shipping routes, assess ice conditions, and provide data for commercial vessels trying to navigate the Arctic as climate change opens up passages that used to be impassable. It is technical work, boring to most people, but it pays well and I get to see parts of the world few others do. Or at least, I thought I knew what I was seeing. We picked up the first distress call on August 14th. I was aboard the Canadian Coast Guard vessel Laurier, part of a routine survey mission in the Beaufort Sea. The radio operator, a young guy named Mills, called me to the comm station around 2 in the morning. He looked pale, confused. He played the recording for me without saying anything. The voice was panicked, desperate. A man screaming about being trapped, about the ice closing in, about crew members going missing. He gave coordinates, shouted a ship name, the Harbinger, and then the transmission cut to static. The audio quality was crystal clear, modern, digital, but the Harbinger was a whaling ship that disappeared in 1847, lost somewhere in the Arctic during an expedition that was supposed to open new hunting grounds. Mills ran the coordinates. They put the distress call about 60 miles northwest of our position, in an area where satellite data showed open water. No ice, no obstructions. We contacted other vessels in the region. Nobody had seen anything. The Coast Guard in Anchorage ran the ship name through their database. Nothing registered, nothing current. I should have left it alone. Ghost stories are common in the Arctic. The cold does things to your mind. The isolation, the endless daylight in summer or endless darkness in winter. Sailors have been seeing phantom ships in these waters for centuries. But something about that voice bothered me. The terror was too real. The coordinates were too specific. I convinced our captain to divert. Just a quick flyover. I said, check the area, confirm it. It's empty, put the mystery to rest. He agreed, probably because the alternative was listening to me obsess about it for the next 2 weeks. We launched our helicopter at first light, me and a pilot named Sarah Chen who had been flying Arctic missions for a decade. The flight took 40 minutes. The landscape below was stunning and alien, fractured ice sheets floating in dark water, the kind of deep blue that looks black from altitude. We reached the coordinates around 7 in the morning. Sarah brought us down to 500 feet. That is when I saw it. A 3-masted sailing ship, wooden hull painted black, trapped in a solid field of pack ice that stretched for miles. Except according to our instruments, there was no ice. The temperature was 42 degrees. The water below should have been completely liquid. Sarah saw it too. She circled twice, both of us staring, trying to reconcile what our eyes were showing us with what our instruments said. The ship looked old, ancient even, with torn sails and a hull that showed obvious damage. I could see the name on the stern through my camera, this zoom lens. Harbinger, the same name from the distress call. We took photos, lots of them. Sarah called it in to the Laurier, described what we were seeing. The response was immediate and strange. They were seeing us on their screens, seeing our helicopter, but their satellite feed showed only open water at our location. No ship, no ice, nothing but empty ocean. Then the ship moved. Not drifting, not floating, it lurched forward through the ice, breaking through pack that our instruments insisted wasn't to there, moving against the current in a way that violated every law of physics I understood. Sarah pulled up fast, instinct taking over. We climbed to 1,000 feet and watched the Harbinger slide through impossible ice, heading northeast at a speed no wooden sailing ship should be able to achieve. We followed it for 10 minutes before our fuel situation forced us back. In that time, the ship covered almost 7 miles, moving in a perfectly straight line, never deviating, never slowing. And I noticed something else. Through my binoculars, I could see the deck. It was empty. No crew, no movement. Just an abandoned wreck somehow propelling itself through ice that didn't exist. Back on the Laurier, I uploaded the photos to our secure server. Within an hour, I had calls from 3 different government agencies, all asking the same questions. What exactly had I seen? Was I certain of the ship's name? Had we attempted to board? The urgency in their voices told me this wasn't the first time the Harbinger had been spotted. An analyst from the Canadian Department of National Defense finally told me the truth. The Harbinger had been sighted 17 times in the past 8 months, always in different locations throughout the Northwest Passage. Coast Guard and military flyovers consistently found nothing, just like our instruments had shown. But cameras, human eyes, they all saw the same thing. An old whaling ship, moving through ice that radar and satellite couldn't detect. And the distress calls. They'd been receiving them for almost a year. Always the same voice, always reporting the same crisis. Trapped in ice, crew disappearing, position deteriorating. But the coordinates were never the same twice. The Harbinger was calling for help from dozens of different locations, sometimes hundreds of miles apart, sometimes within hours of each other. The analyst asked me not to discuss what I'd seen. National security concerns, he said. Potential navigation hazards. I agreed, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, unable to sleep, I started researching the original Harbinger. The historical records were sparse. It left Scotland in 1846 with a crew of 38, hunting bowhead whales in the newly accessible Arctic waters. The last confirmed sighting was in August 1847, near King William Island. After that, nothing. The ship and its entire crew simply vanished. But there were stories. Inuit oral histories mentioned a ghost ship seen in the ice, a vessel that appeared and disappeared, that moved without wind or current. Whalers in the late 19th century reported similar sightings. A ship that shouldn't be there, traveling through impossible conditions, always heading northeast, always empty. 3 days after our sighting, we received another distress call. Same voice, same panic, but different coordinates. This time, the position was only 20 miles from our location. Our captain, now fully invested in the mystery, ordered us to investigate immediately. We made full speed, arriving at the coordinates just after midnight. The Harbinger was there, sitting in open water this time, no ice visible anywhere. We approached slowly, searchlights illuminating the ancient hull. Up close, the damage was more obvious. The wood was rotted, the rigging torn and useless. This ship should have sunk decades ago, should have disintegrated into nothing. But it floated, sat perfectly level in the calm water, and I could hear sounds coming from inside. Creaking, groaning, the sound of a wooden ship settling, except magnified, like the entire structure was breathing. We hailed it over our loudspeakers. No response. Our captain decided to send a boarding party. I volunteered immediately, along with Mills and 2 security officers. We took a rigid hull inflatable, crossing the short distance in less than 5 minutes. Boarding the Harbinger was like stepping into a nightmare. The deck was covered in frost despite the warm August air. Our breath came out in clouds. The temperature had dropped 40 degrees in the space between our boat and the ship, Israel. And the smell, old meat, rot, salt, the scent of something dead preserved in ice for far too long. We split up, Mills and I heading below deck while the security team searched the upper levels. The stairs were narrow, steep, and every step creaked in a way that felt wrong. Too loud, too rhythmic, like the ship was announcing our presence to something waiting below. The crew quarters were empty but intact. Bunks still made, personal effects scattered around, old photographs and journals that turned to dust when I tried to touch them. Everything was frozen, covered in that same impossible frost. And on every surface, scratched into the wood, the same message repeated hundreds of times. Still hunting. Still hunting. Still hunting. We found the captain, his quarters at the end of a long corridor. The door was frozen shut. Mills had to kick it 3 times before it burst open. Inside, we found the source of the distress calls. A modern marine radio. New, expensive, the kind of equipment you find on a contemporary vessel. It was sitting on an antique desk, plugged into nothing, no power source visible, but the display was lit up and active. As we stood there staring, it activated. The same voice we heard in the recordings began transmitting. But this time, I could see there was no one speaking. The radio was generating the voice itself, creating the distress call from nothing, broadcasting to anyone who would listen. And the words had changed. The voice was giving our coordinates, our ship's name, calling for help, saying the Laurier was trapped in ice, saying our crew was disappearing. I grabbed the radio, tried to shut it off. The display showed a message in Old English script. Still hunting. Need crew. Still hunting. Mills screamed. I turned to find him backing away from the cabin, his porthole. I looked out and understood his terror. The water around the Harbinger was freezing, ice forming in real time, spreading out in all directions. And in that ice, I could see them. Bodies. Dozens of bodies frozen in the pack, arms reaching up, faces locked in expressions of terror and confusion. Modern clothes. Recent victims. The crew of the Harbinger had been collecting. We ran, got back to the deck, shouted for the security team. They emerged from below looking sick, traumatized. We didn't discuss what they'd seen. We just got back to our inflatable and pushed off as fast as possible. Behind us, the Harbinger was already moving again, sliding through the impossible ice, heading northeast like it always did. The ice reached our boat before we made it back to the Laurier. Just touched the hull for a second, but it was enough. I felt the cold go through me, through the fiberglass and aluminum, felt it reach into my chest and wrap around my heart. And I heard the voice again, not from the radio this time, but inside my head. Still hunting, always hunting. The passage takes its price. We made it back, barely. The captain ordered us to full speed, running from something that shouldn't to exist, putting distance between us and the Harbinger. We reported everything to the Coast Guard, to the Canadian military, to anyone who would listen. They told us to maintain silence, said the situation was being handled, but I've monitored the reports since then. The sightings haven to stop. The distress calls continue, and sometimes, late at night, I still hear that voice. Still hunting. Still hunting. The Harbinger is out there right now, moving through the Northwest Passage, collecting crew for a journey that never ends. The Arctic is changing. The ice is melting, and something that was locked away for almost 200 years is free now. Free and hunting. I quit the Coast Guard 2 months ago, moved to Phoenix, as far from the ocean as I could get. But I'm still cold, always cold. And last week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was an old ship, this log, pages brown with age. The final entry was dated August 1847. The captain of the Harbinger wrote that they found something in the ice, something that promised them eternal hunting, eternal purpose. All they had to do was accept the cold, accept the passage, become part of it. The last line still haunts me. We accepted. We're still hunting. And I'll never stop meeting crew. My hands are cold as I write this. So cold they re-stiff. And when I look in the mirror, sometimes I see frost forming on my reflection, skin. I think the Harbinger marked me. I think when that ice touched our boat, it marked all of us. If you ever receive a distress call from a ship named Harbinger, Dawn, to respond. Dawn, to investigate. Let it hunt alone. Because once it knows you, re-listening, once it has your coordinates, you're already part of the crew. You just don't know it yet. I'm so cold now. And I can hear the ice forming. Story 5. Signal from cold. The microphone was still warm when they found it. That detail keeps me awake at night, even now, 3 years later. Because I know what it means. I know what was speaking into it during those 72 hours when cold went dark. And I know it wasn't the human. Let me start at the beginning, before I understood what I was walking into. My name is David Marsh, and I used to work for the FCC. Field Inspector, Alaska Division. My job was tracking down signal interference, unlicensed broadcasts, the kind of technical violations that nobody thinks about until their GPS stops working or their emergency radio goes dead. It was boring work, mostly. Paperwork and long drives and small fines issued to people who didn't know their CB radio was bleeding into aviation frequencies. February 2022 changed everything. The cold snap hit the Aleutian Islands like nothing anyone had seen before. -40, -50, temperatures that made the ocean smoke and turned moisture in the air into tiny ice crystals that hung suspended like fog. The kind of cold that kills exposed skin in minutes. That makes buildings groan and metal shatter. That seems almost alive in its hostility. Cold was a tiny AM station on Atka Island, population 69. It broadcast weather reports, community announcements, and classic rock to a handful of fishing villages scattered across the chain. The kind of station that existed because in places like that, radio ISN to entertainment. It is survival. When a storm is coming, when ice is building, when someone needs help. That signal is the only thing connecting people to the rest of the world. On February 9th, cold went off the air. Not unusual. Equipment fails. Storms knock out power. But 12 hours later, it came back on. And all it was broadcasting was a tone. A low, steady hum that sat right at the edge of hearing. The kind of frequency you feel in your chest more than hear with your ears. It was technically illegal, jamming up an emergency band. But more than that, it was wrong. Something about that tone made people uneasy. I got 17 complaints in the first day. The signal continued for 3 days straight. Just that tone. Never changing, never stopping. By day 2, people were reporting headaches, nausea, a feeling of being watched. By day 3, the entire island was on edge. Kids were having nightmares. Dogs wouldn't stop barking. And still, that tone kept broadcasting, steady and patient and somehow hungry. I caught the supply plane out on day 4. The pilot didn't want to make the trip. The cold snap was getting worse, and the wind was picking up. But I pulled rank, showed him the federal mandate, and 6 hours later we were dropping through gray clouds toward a runway carved into frozen rock. The temperature when I stepped off the plane was -53. Cold enough that my first breath burned my lungs. Cold enough that the pilot said he was leaving in 2 hours whether I was back or not. The drive to the station took 40 minutes on roads that were more ice than asphalt. Cold operated out of a small concrete building on the eastern edge of the island, facing the ocean. 1 story, no windows, built to withstand the weather. The generator was running, the lights were on, and from a speaker mounted above the door, that tone was still playing. Louder here, so loud I could feel it in my teeth. I tried the door, unlocked. The interior was overheated, probably 80 degrees, the kind of stifling warmth that feels wrong after the brutal cold outside. 1 room, maybe 20 by 30 feet. Transmitter equipment along one wall, a desk with a computer, a microphone on a boom arm, shelves of CDs and vinyl records. Everything looked normal except for one thing. The DJ was gone. His name was Marcus Pine, according to the staff roster. 46 years old, been running cold for 12 years. His coffee was still on the desk, still steaming. His coat was hanging on a hook by the door. But there was no sign of him. No blood, no struggle, no note. Just an empty chair and that microphone suspended in the air. And when I got close enough, I realized the metal was warm to the touch. Not electrically warm, body warm, like someone had been speaking into it seconds before I walked in. The computer screen was on, showing a simple text document. The same phrase typed over and over, filling page after page. It is learning how we speak. It is learning how we speak. It is learning how we speak. Hundreds of times, thousands maybe. I scrolled and scrolled and the phrase never changed, never stopped. The last entry was timestamped 2 minutes before I walked in. I should have left right then. Should have walked back to my rental truck and driven straight to the airfield. But I am a rational person. I believe in explanations. So I started looking for one. The transmitter was broadcasting normally, no technical faults I could detect. The tone was coming from an audio file on the computer, set to loop indefinitely. I traced the wiring, checked the logs, examined every piece of equipment. Everything was functioning exactly as it should, except none of it explained where Marcus Pine had gone, or why his coffee was still hot, or who had been typing that phrase while I was walking up to the building. Then I noticed the cold. The heater was running full blast, but the temperature in the room was dropping. I could see my breath now, small clouds forming in the air. The metal equipment was developing a thin layer of frost. And the tone, that endless low-frequency hum, was changing. It was developing harmonics, subtle variations, almost like it was forming patterns. Like it was trying to become something more complex. Like it was trying to become words. I grabbed my phone to call for backup, but there was no signal. Not unusual on the islands, but the timing felt deliberate. I was alone in an overheated room that was rapidly freezing, listening to a sound that was learning to speak, and the only other person who had been here had vanished without a trace. The computer screen flickered, new text appeared. It is learning from me. It is learning from you. It is learning from everyone who listens. I didn't type that. The keyboard was 10 feet away. But the words kept coming, appearing in real time, like someone was dictating them. We called it down from the cold. We gave it a voice. Now it wants more than speaking. It wants to be us. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in seconds. The frost spread across the walls, creating those same complex patterns I heard about in old reports. Geometric designs that hurt to look at directly, that seemed to suggest meaning just beyond understanding. And the tones split into multiple frequencies, layering over each other, creating something that almost sounded like breathing. I ran for the door. It opened easily, and I stumbled out into the brutal cold, into wind that felt like knives against exposed skin. Behind me, the building, its lights flickered once and went dark. The generator sputtered and died, and in the sudden silence, I heard something that made my blood freeze colder than any temperature could manage. My own voice, coming from inside the building, speaking words I never said. It was telling someone to come inside, to get out of the cold, to listen to the signal because the signal had something important to share. And it sounded exactly like me. Every inflection, every pause, every tiny detail that makes a voice recognizable. Perfect mimicry. I made it back to the truck and drove to the airfield doing 70 on ice, not caring if I crashed, just needing to get away. The pilot took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. We were airborne in 20 minutes. From the air, I watched coldest transmission tower. It was still broadcasting. I could see the red light at the top, blinking steadily against the gray sky. And I knew the tone was still playing, still going out over the airwaves, still being heard by anyone with a radio in range. Still learning from every voice it touched. The official report said Marcus Pine abandoned his post during the cold snap. Psychological break brought on by isolation and extreme weather. They sent a technician to cold a week later to shut down the equipment. He found the station empty, the computer wiped, no trace of the text document I'd seen. The only anomaly was the microphone. It was still warm, but here is what I didn't put in my report. Here is what I kept to myself for 3 years, until now. I've been hearing my voice in places I've never been, on recordings I never made, in phone calls I never placed. Other people, this voices too. Marcus Pine, yes, the technician who went after me, the pilot, all of us who got close to that signal, all of us who heard that tone. Our voices are out there now, speaking words we never said, broadcasting on frequencies we can detect. And every time someone listens, every time they hear those perfectly mimicked words, it learns a little more. Last week, I got a call from my own number. I didn't answer, but it left a voicemail. 47 seconds of my voice explaining how cold is not temperature. How cold is a carrier wave. How something vast and patient has been waiting in the frozen places of the world for us to give it a way to speak. How radio waves and ice crystals have more in common than we think. How every signal we broadcast into the cold is teaching it our language, our patterns, our way of being. How it is almost ready to speak back. I stopped using my phone, disconnected my radio. But I can still hear it sometimes, in the white noise between stations, in the static of dead channels. That tone, more complex now, layered with voices. Not quite words yet. Not quite human, but getting closer. And the thing that terrifies me most? I checked the records. Cold is still broadcasting. The FCC shut it down twice more, but it keeps coming back. Same frequency, same tone. Still learning, and according to the signal logs, it is not alone anymore. There are stations all over Alaska doing the same thing. Small AM stations in remote locations, all broadcasting variations of that low-frequency hum during the coldest nights. All of them learning how we speak. They found Marcus Pine last month. He walked into a village 300 miles from Atka, wearing summer clothes, barefoot in the snow, seemingly unaffected by cold that should have killed him in minutes. He wouldn't speak, couldn't speak, the doctor said. His vocal cords were intact, but something fundamental was wrong. Like the part of his brain that turns thoughts into words had been rewired for a different kind of language. But late at night, when he thinks no one is listening, he makes sounds. Low-frequency tones, complex patterns of humming that almost seem like communication. And sometimes, if you listen closely enough, you can hear other voices layered underneath his. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe. All the people who had gotten too close to the signal. All of us whose voices it learned. I'm leaving Alaska tomorrow. Moving somewhere warm, somewhere far from cold and isolation and the vast frozen places where things we don't, do you understand, might be learning to use our words against us. But I don't think distance matters anymore. Because that tone is in my head now. I hear it when I close my eyes. I feel it when I speak. And sometimes, just for a second, I hear my own voice saying things I don't remember thinking. It's still learning, and we're still teaching it. If you live in a cold place, and you hear a strange tone on your radio late at night, turn it off. Don't to listen. Don't to try to understand it. Because every second you spend hearing that signal is a second it spends learning you. Your voice, your patterns, your way of being human. And when it finally speaks, when it uses our voices to say whatever it's been trying to say all along, I don't think we're going to like what we hear. The microphone was warm because something was using it. And that something is still out there, still broadcasting, still learning, getting better at being us with every word we speak into the frozen air. Story 6. Shadow race. I ran Mount Marathon in 1986, and I've been running from what I saw ever since. Let me be clear about something right up front. I was stone cold sober that day, 28 years old, in the best shape of my life, training for months to compete in one of Alaska's oldest and most grueling races. 3 miles straight up a mountain, 3 miles straight down. No drugs, no alcohol, no history of mental illness. I'm telling you this because what I saw, what we all saw, was real. And the fact that nobody talks about it anymore scares me more than what actually happened. The race starts every 4th of July in downtown Seward, right at sea level. 1,500 vertical feet of climbing in less than 2 miles, scrambling over rocks and scree, your lungs burning in the thin air. Then you touch the peak and come screaming back down, sliding and falling and trying not to break your neck. People die on Mount Marathon. Not often, but it happens. The mountain doesn't care about your training or your spirit. It takes what it wants. July 4th, 1986 was unseasonably cold. Temperature at the starting line was maybe 45 degrees, and thick fog was rolling in from Resurrection Bay. The race organizers debated postponing, but the crowd had been gathering since dawn. Thousands of people lining the streets, all of them expecting a show. So they decided to run it anyway, fog or no fog. I was in the second wave of racers, the men's division, standing packed shoulder to shoulder with 200 other runners. The energy was electric, everyone psyching themselves up, bouncing on their toes, ready to charge up that mountain like it owed them money. The starting gun fired and we surged forward, a mass of bodies funneling onto the narrow trail that led up into the fog. The first quarter mile is steep but manageable, switchbacks through alder bushes and spruce trees. I found my rhythm quickly, settling into a sustainable pace. I could hear other runners around me, breathing hard, shoes pounding the dirt. Normal race sounds, normal race feelings. Then we hit the fog bank. It came down like a curtain, thick and gray and completely disorienting. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet. I could barely see the runner in front of me. The sounds changed too. Everything became muffled and distant, like someone had wrapped the whole mountain in cotton. I kept climbing, following the trail by feel more than sight, trusting that the person ahead knew where they were going. That's when I noticed them. Shadows moving parallel to us, just visible through the fog. At first I thought they were other runners who veered off trail, but they were moving wrong. Too smooth, too fast. They didn't bob up and down the way runners do. They just glided through the fog like they were floating, keeping perfect pace with us no matter how fast or slow we went. I blinked hard, wiping condensation from my eyes, figuring it was some trick of the fog and the altitude. But they were still there. Dark shapes, roughly human-sized, running alongside the trail maybe 20 yards out. I counted 6 of them, then 8, then more than I could track. A whole parallel race happening in the fog, silent and strange. The runner next to me, a guy in his 30s with a yellow singlet, saw them too. I could tell by the way his head kept snapping to the left, watching those shapes move through the gray. He looked at me and I looked at him, and I saw my own confusion and fear reflected in his face. But we kept running because that is what you do in a race. You don't stop. You don't quit. You push through. The trail got steeper. We were in the scree field now, scrambling over loose rocks, using our hands to pull ourselves up. My heart was hammering, partly from exertion, partly from the growing sense that something was fundamentally wrong. The shadows were getting closer, not gradually, but in sudden jumps, like they were skipping frames in a film. 1 second they'd be 30 yards away, the next they'd be 15, and I never saw them actually move the distance between. Then I saw their faces, or rather, I saw where their faces should have been. Smooth and blank, like mannequins, but somehow still looking at us. Watching us struggle and strain while they moved without effort, without sound, without any sign of being real physical beings. One of them kept pace with me for maybe 30 seconds, close enough that I could have reached out and touched it if I had been crazy enough to try. It had no features at all, just a dark oval where a head should be, and its body was wrong too, the proportions slightly off in ways that made my brain hurt trying to process. Other runners were seeing them now. I could hear the change in people, his breathing, the little gasps and muttered curses. But nobody stopped, nobody said anything. We just kept climbing into that fog, racing alongside things that shouldn't exist, all of us trapped in some shared delusion or nightmare. We reached the peak around the same time the fog got thicker. I couldn't see more than 5 feet in any direction. The shadows had multiplied. There were dozens of them now, maybe hundreds, surrounding us on all sides. Silent spectators to our suffering. I touched the peak marker, that rusted metal post that marked the turnaround point, and immediately started my descent. Going down Mount Marathon is controlled falling. You slide on your ass, skip over rocks, try to keep your momentum without losing control. It is terrifying in good conditions. In the fog, with those things watching, it was absolute hell. I fell hard twice, scraping my hands raw on the rocks, tasting blood in my mouth. Every time I looked up, I saw more shadows. They were descending with us now, matching our chaotic downward plunge with that same impossible smoothness. Then the trail vanished, not just obscured by fog, but actually gone. 1 second I was sliding down the established race course. The next I was in virgin forest with no trail at all. Dense spruce trees pressing in from all sides, the ground thick with moss and deadfall. I stopped, completely disoriented. Other runners were appearing around me, coming out of the fog looking just as confused. We somehow gotten off course, all of us at once. Despite following the same trail, we climbed up. The shadows were all around us now. Standing between the trees, watching, waiting, I counted at least 50 of them in my immediate area, and I could sense more in the fog beyond. They formed a circle around us, trapping maybe 20 runners in a small clearing. Nobody was moving. We just stood there, chests heaving, looking at these impossible things and trying to understand what was happening. That is when one of them moved forward, slow and deliberate, gliding across the moss without making a sound. It approached the runner in the yellow singlet, the same guy who had been near me on the climb. He backed away, hands up like he was trying to ward it off, but it kept coming. When it was maybe 3 feet away, it stopped. Then it started to change. The shadow began to take form. Features emerged from that blank surface. A face, the runner. His face. An exact copy, perfect in every detail except for the eyes. The eyes stayed dark and empty, like looking into deep water at night. The thing wearing the runner, his face tilted its head, studying him, learning him. The runner screamed. It was the first real sound any of us had made since entering the clearing, and it broke whatever spell had been holding us frozen. We all ran at once, scattering in different directions, crashing through the undergrowth without any idea where we were going. I could hear the shadows moving behind us now, not just gliding but actively pursuing, branches snapping, leaves rustling, sounds they hadn't been making before. I ran for maybe 10 minutes before the fog started to lift. It happened suddenly, like someone turning up the lights. One moment I was blind and lost. The next I could see clear blue sky above and the town of Seward below. The race trail was right there, 20 feet to my left. I'd been running parallel to it the whole time. The shadows were gone, completely, like they never existed. I stumbled down the rest of the mountain in a daze, my legs shaking, my mind refusing to process what I experienced. Other runners were emerging from the fog too, all of us with the same shell-shocked expression. When I finally crossed the finish line, my time was over 2 hours. I'd been lost in those woods for at least 45 minutes. The weird thing was how everyone reacted afterward, or didn't react. The race officials were annoyed that so many runners had gotten off course, blamed the fog and poor trail marking. The local news covered it as a quirky story about visibility problems. Nobody mentioned the shadows, not in any official capacity, not in any news report. It was like a collective agreement to pretend it hadn't happened. But it had happened. I knew it had because of what I found in my pocket 3 days later. A small smooth stone, perfectly round, cold to the touch even in warm weather. I'd never seen it before. It wasn't from Mount Marathon. Wasn't from anywhere I recognized. It was just there, like someone or something had slipped it into my running shorts while I was in that clearing. I threw it in Resurrection Bay, watched it sink into the dark water. But that night I woke up with another one on my nightstand. Same size, same unnatural smoothness, same impossible coldness. I threw that one away too. The next morning there were 3 of them, on my kitchen counter, in my car, in my gym bag. No matter how many times I got rid of them, more appeared. I left Alaska 2 weeks after the race, moved back to Oregon, tried to forget. The stones stopped appearing after I crossed the border, and I thought maybe I escaped whatever had marked me in that fog. But I was wrong, because every year on July 4th, I see them. The shadows, standing at the edge of my vision, just barely visible in my peripheral, watching me from a distance that never changes no matter how far I move. They, not just in Alaska, they everywhere now. I've seen them in Portland, in Seattle, in San Francisco. Silent observers at every race I've ever run since 1986. And I've run a lot of races, trying to outdistance something that doesn't move through normal space. They were always there, keeping perfect pace, never getting closer but never falling behind either. I did some research over the years, digging through old newspapers and local archives. Turns out strange things have been happening on Mount Marathon since the race started in 1915. Runners disappearing into the fog and coming back changed. People finishing the race with no memory of running it. Unexplained deaths on the mountain that never quite made sense. In 2012, a runner named Michael Lemaitre vanished on the course and was never found. Search teams combed every inch of that mountain for weeks. Nothing, like he stepped into another dimension and never came back. I think about him sometimes. Wonder if he saw what I saw. Wonder if he made different choices in that clearing. If he stayed when I ran. If he let one of those shadows get close enough to finish whatever transformation it was attempting. Wonder if he is still up there somewhere, wearing his own face but with dark empty eyes, running an eternal race that nobody else can see. The runner in the yellow singlet killed himself 3 months after the race. Jumped off a bridge in Anchorage. I found out from an old racing buddy who stayed in Alaska. He said the guy had been acting strange since Mount Marathon, kept talking about being followed, about seeing himself in places he hadn't been. His wife told the police he'd been having vivid dreams about running through fog, about being copied and replaced by something that knew everything about him but wasn't him. I think about calling his widow sometimes, telling her what really happened up there. But what would I say? That her husband was marked by impossible shadows during a race? That something from another reality or dimension or wherever those things come from had chosen him and wouldn't let go? It sounds insane. I sound insane just thinking it. But I know what I saw. We all know what we saw that day, those of us who were in that clearing. And the fact that we talk about it, that we all made this silent agreement to pretend it was just fog and confusion, makes it worse somehow. Because silence doesn't make things go away. It just lets them grow in the dark. I am 56 years old now. I still run, though not competitively anymore. Just maintenance miles, trying to stay healthy, trying to keep moving. And every time I run, they there. The shadows, keeping pace, waiting. I don't. Do you know what they want? I don't. Do you know why they chose us? But I know they patient, and I know they still watching. Sometimes I think about going back to Mount Marathon, running it again on July 4th, seeing if the fog comes down like it did in 1986. Seeing if those shadows are still up there, running their silent race, waiting for the next group of runners to stumble into their territory. But I'm too scared. Not of dying. I made peace with mortality years ago. I'm scared of what happens if I die. If I come back changed like that runner in the yellow singlet. If I come back with dark empty eyes and the growing certainty that I'm not who I think I am anymore. The stones appeared again last night. 3 of them on my nightstand when I woke up. Perfectly round. Perfectly cold. After 38 years of nothing. I don't know what it means, but I know what it feels like. It feels like a reminder. It feels like they're getting impatient. It feels like the shadow race is finally coming to an end, and soon they'll understand what those things really were, what they really wanted. I am running Mount Marathon this July. I already bought the plane ticket. Do you know why? Some compulsion I can, to explain. Some pull I can, to resist. Maybe I'll find answers. Maybe I'll find Michael Lemaitre. Maybe I'll just find fog and rocks and nothing supernatural at all. And I'll finally realize I've been crazy this whole time. Or maybe I'll see them again. The shadows. And this time, I won. T-Run. Story 7. Heart of the glacier. The ice was whispering my name in a language I'd never heard before. And somehow I understood every word. I need to tell you this story before I go back. Before I finish what I started 3 weeks ago in the Mendenhall Glacier Caves outside Juneau, Alaska. I am a tour guide. Was a tour guide. 42 years old. Former park ranger. Divorced. No kids. The kind of stable, boring life where the most exciting thing that happens is deciding between pizza or Chinese food on a Friday night. I thought I knew those ice caves better than anyone. Turned out I didn't know anything at all. The Mendenhall Glacier is 12 miles long and has been carving through the mountains for 3,000 years. The ice caves form naturally when meltwater runs through the glacier, creating these incredible blue tunnels that look like something from another planet. Pure crystalline walls that glow when sunlight filters through the ice. Tourists pay good money to see them, and I've been leading groups through for 6 years without incident. Until October 17th. That's when everything changed. That's when the glacier started talking. I had a small group that day. Just 4 people. A retired couple from Minnesota, a photographer from Seattle, and a solo traveler from Germany who barely spoke English. We kayaked across Mendenhall Lake in the afternoon. The weather perfect. Not a cloud in the sky. The glacier rose up before us like a frozen cathedral, white and blue and ancient beyond comprehension. I've seen it 1,000 times, but it still took my breath away. We beached the kayaks and hiked up to the cave entrance. Standard safety briefing. Watch your footing. Don't touch the walls more than necessary. Stay together. Follow my lead. The caves can be dangerous. The ice is constantly shifting, melting, reforming. People have died in there when tunnels collapsed or when they wandered off and got lost in passages that hadn't existed the day before. The moment we stepped inside, I knew something was different. The temperature was wrong. It should have been just above freezing, maybe 35 degrees. Instead, it felt colder, much colder, the kind of cold that goes through your jacket and settles into your bones. And the light was off too. Usually the ice glows bright blue when sun hits it. That day it looked darker, almost purple, like a bruise. We moved deeper into the cave system, following the main tunnel. I pointed out interesting formations, explained how the caves form, kept up the usual tour guide patter. But I was distracted. There was a sound in the ice, barely audible under the drip of meltwater and the crunch of our boots. A low humming, almost below the threshold of hearing, like someone breathing very slowly, very deliberately. The photographer heard it too. She stopped walking and pressed her ear against the ice wall, her eyes going distant and unfocused. I told her to keep moving, that we needed to stay together, but she didn't respond. Just stood there listening to something the rest of us couldn't quite make out. After maybe 30 seconds, she pulled away, shaking her head like she was coming out of a trance. She looked at me with this strange expression, confused and frightened and excited all at once. We continued deeper. The tunnel branched off in directions I didn't recognize. I mapped these caves extensively, photographed them, knew every major passage. But the glacier had changed. New tunnels had opened up, leading down into darkness, into cold so intense it made my teeth ache. One of them was calling to me. Not with words, exactly. More like a feeling, a certainty that I needed to go that way, that something important was waiting in the depths. I ignored it, kept the group on the established route, but the feeling grew stronger with every step. By the time we reached the deepest chamber on the tour, that massive room where the ice forms natural pillars and the ceiling rises 30 feet overhead, I was sweating despite the cold. My hands were shaking, and I could hear the whispers clearly now. They weren't in English, weren't in any human language. But I understood them perfectly. They were saying my name, telling me to come deeper, telling me that the heart of the glacier wanted to meet me, had been waiting for me, had chosen me from all the countless people who walked these caves over the years. The retired couple asked if I was okay. I must have looked as bad as I felt. I told them we needed to head back, that the weather might turn, some excuse that didn't make sense even as I said it. We started the return journey, and that is when things got worse. The German traveler was missing. I did a quick head count and came up one short. He'd been at the back of the group, quiet and observant, and now he was just gone. I told everyone to wait while I backtracked, my headlamp cutting through the blue darkness. I found him maybe 50 yards back, standing at the entrance to one of those new tunnels, the ones that shouldn't to exist. He was listening, head tilted, eyes closed, completely still. I called his name. He didn't respond. I grabbed his shoulder and he turned to look at me, and his eyes were wrong. The pupils were too large, swallowing up the iris, reflecting my headlamp beam like an animal, his eyes in the dark. He smiled and pointed down into the tunnel, into that impossible depth, and said something in German that I didn't understand but felt in my chest like a physical weight. Then he started walking, down into the darkness, away from the main cave, toward whatever was calling from the heart of the glacier. I tried to stop him, grabbed his arm, yelled for help. He was stronger than he looked, shoved me hard enough to knock me down on the ice, then disappeared into that tunnel so fast it was like the darkness swallowed him whole. I got the rest of the group out, told them there'd been an incident, that someone had wandered off, that we needed to get back and alert search and rescue. The photographer kept looking back at the caves, that same hungry expression on her face. The retired couple seemed shaken but okay. We kayaked back across the lake in silence. Search and rescue went in that evening. They found no trace of the German traveler. No footprints in the new snow inside the caves. No sign he'd ever been there at all. The tunnel I'd seen him enter wasn't there anymore. The glacier had shifted, sealing it off, rearranging itself like a living thing protecting its secrets. After 3 days, they called off the search. Another tragic disappearance in the Alaskan wilderness. Another person who underestimated the danger. Case closed, but I couldn't let it go. I kept thinking about those whispers, about the feeling of being called, about the look in his eyes before he walked into the dark. I started researching the glacier as history. Turns out people have been disappearing in those caves for decades. Not often, maybe one person every few years, but enough to establish a pattern. Hikers, tourists, even experienced guides, all of them vanished without a trace, and all of them were last seen near the deeper sections of the cave system. There were older stories too. Native legends about the glacier being alive, being hungry, being something more than just frozen water and compressed snow. The Tlingit people who lived in this area for thousands of years had a name for it. They called it the Keeper of Lost Souls, and they said it would call people into its depths to feed on their warmth, their life force, their essence. They said you could hear it whispering if you listened carefully, speaking in the language of ice and ancient cold, promising knowledge and power and belonging to anyone who would come to its heart. I thought about ignoring it all, finding a new job, moving to a different state, but the whispers followed me home. I could hear them in the shower, in the wind outside my window, in the white noise of traffic on the highway. Soft and insistent, always the same message. Come back, come deeper, come home. Last week I went back to the caves alone. No tour group, no safety equipment beyond a headlamp and warm clothes. I told myself I just wanted to see, to understand, to prove that it was all in my head. But that was a lie. I wanted to answer the call. I wanted to find out what was waiting in the heart of the glacier. The new tunnels were there again, opening like veins in the ice, leading down into cold so pure it felt holy. I followed them, deeper than any tourist had ever gone, deeper than the mapped sections, down into chambers that hadn't seen light since the ice first formed 3 millennia ago. And the whispers got louder with every step, clearer, more insistent, wrapping around my thoughts until I couldn't remember why I ever resisted. I found the chamber after maybe an hour of walking. A massive space, hundreds of feet across. The walls so clear you could see layers of compressed snow going back thousands of years. And in the center was something I still can't properly describe. Not a thing, exactly. More like a presence, a consciousness trapped in the ice, ancient and vast and completely alien to human understanding. It spoke to me, not in words but in feelings and images that flooded my mind all at once. It showed me what it was, how it had been sleeping in the glacier since before humans walked the earth, how it fed on the life force of anyone foolish enough to venture too deep. The German traveler was there, and dozens of others, their consciousness absorbed into the thing, this greater whole, still aware but no longer individual, no longer themselves. And it offered me a choice. Turn back now and live with the memory forever, always hearing the whispers, always feeling the pull. Or stay, become part of something older and stranger than my small human life. Give up my individual existence for a kind of immortality, merged with all the other lost souls who de-answered the glacier. His call. I ran, stumbled and fell and crawled my way back through those tunnels, the whispers turning angry behind me, the ice groaning and cracking as the glacier tried to stop my escape. I made it out somehow, burst into daylight gasping and half frozen, and swore I'd never go back. But that was a week ago, and the whispers are getting louder. They're not just in my head anymore. Other people can hear them now too. My neighbor asked me yesterday why I was playing strange music so late at night. My coworker mentioned she heard humming coming from my office when I wasn't there. The photographer from my last tour called me this morning. She said she's been having dreams about the caves, about going deeper, about finding something beautiful and terrible waiting in the ice. I know what's happening. The glacier marked me when I went into that chamber. I am connected to it now, broadcasting its call like some kind of antenna. And I can feel myself changing. My body temperature has dropped 2 degrees. I don't feel cold anymore, even when it is freezing outside. And I understand the whispers completely now. Every word, every subtle meaning in that ancient language of ice and darkness. It's telling me to come back, to bring others, to help it wake up fully, to help it spread beyond the glacier, to help it claim this whole frozen land as its own. And the worst part is I want to. Some growing part of me wants nothing more than to return to that chamber, to give myself over completely, to become part of something vast and eternal. I am leaving this recording as a warning. Don, to go into the Mendenhall ice caves. Don, to listen if you hear whispers in the ice. Don, to follow the new tunnels that appear and disappear with the glacier, with shifting moods. And if you see me there, leading tours again with strange light in my eyes, Don, to follow me into the deep places. Don, to trust what I say. Because by then I want to be me anymore. I'm going back tonight. Not because I'm brave or curious or stupid. Because I don't to have a choice. The glacier owns me now. And it is calling me home. To the heart, to the cold, to whatever waits in the deepest chamber where the ice has been dreaming for 3,000 years. If you re-listening to this, it means I didn't to come back. It means I'm down there now, part of the glacier, this collection. My consciousness merged with all the others who came before. And if you ever visit Juneau, if you ever kayak across that lake and step into those blue tunnels, you might hear me whispering. You might hear all of us whispering, calling you deeper, promising you wonders and horrors beyond imagining. The heart of the glacier is waiting. It's always waiting. And eventually, if you listen long enough, you'll understand why we had to go. Why we had to answer. Why the cold and the dark and the ancient hunger are worth giving up everything you are. The ice is whispering right now. I can hear it through the walls. This time, Story 8, Valley of Silent Wings. I found the valley 3 months ago, and I haven't. He slept through the night since. When people ask me why I stopped flying, I tell them it was health issues. Early retirement. But that's a lot. The truth is, I'm terrified that if I get back in a cockpit, I'll hear that voice again. And this time, I want to be strong enough to resist. My name is Jake Thornton. They've been a bush pilot in Alaska for 18 years. They've flown supplies to remote villages, medical evacuations, hunting parties, scientific expeditions. They landed on glaciers, gravel bars, and frozen lakes. They've flown through storms that would make seasoned pilots turn back. I thought I had seen everything the Wrangell Mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It started with a contract job in late July. A geological survey team needed supplies dropped at a research camp deep in the Wrangells, about 40 miles northeast of McCarthy. Standard run. I had done it a dozen times before. Load up my Cessna 185, fly the route, drop the supplies, fly back. 3 hours round trip, weather permitting. The weather that morning was perfect. Clear skies, light winds, visibility unlimited. The kind of day that makes you remember why you love flying in Alaska. I took off from Golconda Airport just after sunrise, the mountains golden in the early light, and followed the familiar route into the heart of the Wrangels. Everything was normal for the first hour. I checked in with the research team on the radio, confirmed my ETA, adjusted my heading slightly to account for a crosswind. Just another Tuesday morning at the office. Then my compass started acting strange. At first, I thought it was just magnetic interference from the mountains. Happens sometimes in areas with high mineral content. But this was different. The needle was spinning. Not drifting. Spinning, making complete circles like it couldn't find north. Like north had disappeared. I switched to my backup GPS. The screen flickered. The coordinates scrambled, then went blank. That is when I should have turned back. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to abort the flight. But I could still see the landmarks. I knew these mountains. I could navigate by sight until I reached the research camp, drop the supplies, and get the instruments checked out back in Gulkana. So I kept flying. And that decision has haunted me every single day since. I was following a valley I had flown through 100 times when I noticed something wrong. The peaks looked familiar, but the spacing was off. The glacier to my left should have been smaller. The ridgeline ahead should have been higher. It was like someone had taken the landscape and stretched it, changed the proportions just enough to make it feel wrong. And then I saw the break in the valley wall. I had never seen it before. A narrow gap between two peaks, hidden unless you approached from exactly the right angle. Something about it pulled at me. Not curiosity, something deeper, more primal, like a fish feeling a hook in its mouth but swimming toward it anyway. I banked left, turned toward the gap. I told myself I was just investigating, checking it out, adding it to my mental map of the region. But my hands were shaking on the yoke. My heart was pounding, and somewhere deep in my mind, a voice I didn't recognize was whispering coordinates I shouldn't know. The gap opened into a valley I had never seen on any map. Narrow, deep, the walls so steep and close that my wingtips nearly brushed rock. The floor was flat, unnaturally flat, covered in what looked like old ice or packed snow that never melted, even in the middle of summer. And scattered across that floor were planes. Dozens of them. I dropped altitude, unable to believe what I was seeing. Bush planes mostly, Cessnas, Pipers, de Havilland Beavers. But also bigger aircraft, a DC-3, what looked like a military transport from the 50s, even a small passenger jet that had no business being anywhere near these mountains. They were intact, not crashed, not broken, just sitting there on their landing gear like they had taxied to a perfect stop and shut down their engines. No burn marks, no impact damage, no signs of distress at all. I circled lower. I knew I should climb out, get back to civilization, report this, but I couldn't. To stop looking. Couldn't. To stop counting. 37 planes. I counted them 3 times to be sure. 37 aircraft, representing decades of disappearances, all sitting silent in a hidden valley that shouldn't exist. That is when I noticed the tracks. Footprints, leading away from every cockpit, walking away from the planes in straight lines, heading toward the far end of the valley where the mountains came together in a sheer rock wall. The prints were visible in the frost that covered the valley floor, preserved like they had been made yesterday. Or this morning, or 5 minutes ago. I should have left then. Should have climbed out of that valley and never looked back. But I saw something that made me do the stupidest thing I've ever done in 18 years of flying. One of the planes was a Cessna 185. Same model as mine, same paint scheme, same tail number, my tail number. I looked at the data plate on my instrument panel to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. November 74 Charlie Tango. I looked back at the plane on the valley floor. November 74 Charlie Tango. My plane was down there, sitting among the others, with footprints leading away from it. But I was up here, flying, very much not crashed, very much not walking toward that rock wall. My radio crackled, static at first, then something that might have been words, distorted, backwards, like someone playing a recording in reverse. And underneath the static, I heard it, a sound that made every hair on my body stand up. Singing, dozens of voices, singing in harmony, a melody I had never heard but somehow recognized, like a song from a dream I didn't quite remember. The engine coughed. I looked at my gauges. Fuel pressure dropping, oil temperature rising, RPM fluctuating, every system going haywire at once. The engine coughed again, sputtered, and I realized with absolute certainty that I was going down. I had maybe 60 seconds before I lost power completely. The valley floor was right there. Flat, perfect for an emergency landing. I could sit down next to my own impossible duplicate, figure out what was happening, maybe fix the engine or call for help. Every part of my training told me to land, to get the plane on the ground before I fell out of the sky. But something else, some deeper instinct, was screaming at me to do the opposite. I pushed the throttle forward, pulled back on the yoke, aimed for the gap in the valley wall I had come through. The engine was dying. The plane was shaking. But I climbed. I climbed like my life depended on it. The singing got louder. So loud it felt like it was inside my skull. And with it came whispers, instructions, telling me to land, telling me it was safe, telling me everyone else had landed and walked toward the wall and found something wonderful. I screamed to drown out the voices, held the yoke with both hands, watched the gap getting closer. 20 feet, 10 feet. The engine was barely running. The plane was barely flying. 5 feet. I shot through the gap with maybe 6 inches of clearance on each side. The moment I cleared it, the engine roared back to life. All systems normal. The singing stopped. The whispers stopped. And I was back in the familiar valley with the familiar mountains and my compass pointing steadily north like nothing had happened. I flew straight back to Gulkana. Didn't stop to drop the supplies. Didn't radio ahead. Just flew as fast as that Cessna could go until I had solid ground under my wheels. The first thing I did was check my plane, its maintenance logs. Looking for any record of engine problems. Looking for proof that what had happened was mechanical failure and nothing else. But the logs were clean. No issues, no anomalies, just routine maintenance and a note that the engine had been completely rebuilt 6 months ago. The second thing I did was start researching. Missing aircraft in Alaska. Disappearances in the Wrangels. Anything that might explain what I had seen. I found more than I wanted to. The earliest recorded disappearance was in 1947. A military transport flying from Anchorage to Fairbanks. Vanished without a trace. No wreckage ever found. No distress call. Just gone. After that, there was a pattern. Every few years, another plane would disappear in the Wrangels. Sometimes small bush planes. Sometimes commercial aircraft. Sometimes military. The official explanations varied. Pilot error. Weather. Mechanical failure. But in every case, no wreckage was ever recovered. No bodies. No debris. Just empty sky and unanswered questions. I found pilot forums where people discussed the disappearances. Most of it was standard speculation. Dangerous terrain. Unpredictable weather. The usual hazards of flying in Alaska. But buried in one old thread from 2008, I found something that made my blood run cold. A pilot named Tom Hendricks had posted about experiencing compass and GPS failure while flying through the Wrangels. He described seeing a gap in the valley wall, feeling compelled to fly toward it, and then, at the last moment, turning back. He wrote that he saw something in the gap, a valley full of planes. He posted grid coordinates and asked if anyone else had seen it. Nobody replied, and Tom Hendricks never posted again. I looked up his name, found an obituary from 2009. He had died in a plane crash in the Wrangels. No survivors, no wreckage recovered. His Piper Cherokee had simply vanished mid-flight on a clear day with perfect visibility. I spent the next week trying to convince myself I had hallucinated the whole thing. Hypoxia, carbon monoxide, a waking dream brought on by stress and fatigue. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that my plane, my exact plane, had been sitting in that valley. Which meant one of two things. Either I had seen the future, a glimpse of where I would eventually crash and disappear, or I had seen something else, something impossible, a place where every version of me that had made the wrong choice was already there. Already walking toward that wall. Already gone. I started having nightmares. Every night, the same dream. I am flying through the gap, landing in the valley, shutting down the engine, and then I am walking, following the footprints, following the singing, toward that rock wall at the far end of the valley. And when I get close, I see what is there. What they all walk toward. What called them with that beautiful, terrible song. The wall ISN, T-Rock. It's a door. A seam in reality so thin you could miss it if you weren't looking directly at it. And through that seam, I can see something vast and dark and hungry. Something that has been calling to pilots for decades. Drawing them in, collecting them. In the dream, I always walk through. And on the other side, I find all the others. The missing pilots, the vanished passengers. All of them standing in rows. Facing something I can see. Still singing. Always singing. And then I wake up, covered in sweat, gasping for air. With the absolute certainty that the dream isn't just a dream. It's a memory of something that hasn't happened yet. Or something that happened to another version of me in another reality where I made the wrong choice. 3 weeks after I found the valley, I tried to report it. I contacted the FAA, gave them the coordinates, told them about the planes. But when they sent a search team, they found nothing. Just mountains and ice and empty valleys. No gap, no hidden basin, no aircraft. They asked me if I was feeling okay. suggested I take some time off, get checked out by a doctor. I took their advice, grounded myself, sold my plane, told everyone I was retiring early. But the dream's haven, stopped. And the singing hasn't, stopped. Every night, I hear it, getting louder, getting closer, like whatever is behind that wall in the valley is getting impatient. Like it knows I got away and it wants me back. I started researching the other pilots who disappeared, looking for patterns, looking for anything that might explain what I saw. And I found something that terrifies me more than anything else. Every single pilot who vanished in the Wrangles had reported the same thing in the days before they disappeared. Compass malfunctions, GPS failures, dreams about singing, and every single one of them had filed a final flight plan that took them through the same area where I saw the gap. But here is what keeps me awake at night. I found interview transcripts with family members, people who talked to the pilots right before their final flights. And they all said the same thing. The pilots seemed different, distracted, like they were listening to something no one else could hear. One wife said her husband woke up the night before he disappeared and told her he needed to go back. When she asked back where, he said he didn't know. He just knew he had to fly that road again. That something was waiting for him. He never came home. I started wondering if the me that got away was the lucky one. Or if the me that landed in the valley was the one who found what he was really looking for. Maybe those pilots didn't crash. Maybe they found exactly what they were meant to find. A door to somewhere else. Somewhere that had been calling to them their entire lives. And maybe the reason I can still hear the singing is because I'm not done yet. Because some part of me is still in that valley. Still walking toward that wall. Still about to discover what is on the other side. Last week, I went back to the coordinates where the gap should be. I didn't fly. I hiked in 3 days through some of the most brutal terrain in Alaska. When I finally reached the valley wall, I found something that confirmed my worst fears. Scratch marks, hundreds of them, carved into the rock face, names and dates going back decades. Tom Hendricks, Sarah Chen, Michael Rodriguez, every pilot who disappeared, they had all been here. They had all carved their names before walking through. And at the bottom, freshly carved, I found mine. Jake Thornton, with today, his date. But I didn't carve it. I haven't been carrying anything sharp. And the marks were fresh, made within the last few hours, which means I am already there. Some version of me has already made the choice, already walked through, already found what's waiting on the other side. And the me telling you this story right now is just an echo, a reflection, the version that got away but is slowly being pulled back, because the valley doesn't let go. It never lets go. I can hear the singing right now. As I record this, it's not in my dreams anymore. It is here, in my house, coming from the walls, from the floor, from inside my own chest. And I understand now what Tom Hendricks understood before he disappeared, what all of them understood. The Valley ISN, a place. It is a choice, a moment that repeats across infinite versions of reality until you finally make the right decision. Or the wrong one. I'm going back tomorrow. I don't have a choice anymore. The singing is too loud. The pull is too strong. And I need to know what is behind that door in the wall. What called to all those pilots? What has been waiting for me since the first time I flew through the Wrangles 18 years ago? Maybe I'll find them, all the missing pilots, standing in rows, singing that beautiful, terrible song. And maybe I'll finally understand why they never came home. Or maybe I'll find something else, something that explains why my plane is already there, why my name is already carved in the rock, why every version of this story ends the same way. If you re-listening to this, and you fly in Alaska, I need you to remember something. If your compass starts spinning, turn back. If you see a gap in the valley wall, climb. And if you hear singing, run. Run as fast and far as you can, because the valley is patient. And it has been collecting pilots for a very long time. And once it starts calling your name, it never stops. I can see the gap now, right outside my window, in the middle of my suburban neighborhood, between two houses that weren't there yesterday. And through it, I can see the valley, the plains, the footprints, and at the far end, that seam in the rock face. That door, it is open, and everyone inside is singing my name. Story 9. Valley that calls pilots home. The last thing my brother said before his plane vanished was that he could see home. That should have been impossible. Jake was flying a supply run 200 miles northeast of Anchorage, deep in the Wrangell Mountains. Home was our childhood house in Tacoma, torn down 15 years ago to make room for a strip mall. But according to the radio transcript, In his final transmission, Jake said he could see our old house below him, perfectly preserved, and that he was going to land and check it out. They never found his plane. They never found him. The search and rescue operation lasted 11 days before they called it off, blaming bad weather and the impossible terrain. I accepted it the way you accept anything that doesn't make sense. My little brother was gone. The mountains had taken him. That was 3 months ago. I should have let it go. Should have moved on. Should have done a lot of things I didn't do. Instead, I cashed in my savings, took a leave from my job as an accountant in Seattle, and flew to Alaska to find answers that everyone told me didn't exist. My name is David Brenner. I am 41 years old. I've never been the adventurous type. Jake got all those genes. I got the ones that made me good at spreadsheets and following rules. But Jake was my brother, and I couldn't let him just disappear into nothing. I owed him more than that. I started asking questions in Anchorage, talked to bush pilots at every small airport and landing strip I could find. Most of them were polite but dismissive. Planes went missing in Alaska all the time. The wilderness was unforgiving. Jake had probably encountered sudden weather, mechanical failure, any number of rational explanations. I should go home and grieve properly. But 3 pilots told me something else. They told me about the valley. It took me 2 weeks of asking before anyone would even mention it. Bush pilots are superstitious by nature, and this was something they didn't talk about with outsiders. But I was persistent, and eventually, a 67-year-old pilot named Ray Kowalski agreed to meet me at a bar in Palmer. Ray had been flying in Alaska for 42 years. He survived 3 crashes, 2 engine failures, and more close calls than he could count. He also seen the valley once, back in 1998, and he told me it had haunted him every day since. According to Ray, there was a hidden valley deep in the Wrangell Mountains that didn't appear on any map. It was surrounded by peaks that created a natural barrier, making it nearly impossible to spot from the air unless you knew exactly where to look. And in that valley, perfectly preserved in the cold, dry air, were dozens of aircraft. Small planes mostly, bush planes, Cessnas and Pipers, and a few military craft from decades past. The strange part, Ray said, was that none of them showed crash damage. They were intact, landed, sitting on their wheels in neat rows like they'd been parked at an airport. But every single cockpit was empty. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just abandoned planes with their engines cold and their logbooks telling impossible stories. I asked him what he meant by impossible stories. Ray finished his beer before answering. He told me that in 1998, he'd been forced to make an emergency landing in the valley after his engine started failing. He spotted it from above, this impossible collection of aircraft, and managed to put his plane down among them. While waiting for his emergency beacon to bring help, he explored some of the other wrecks. Every plane he checked had a logbook, and every logbook ended the same way. The pilot would write about seeing something below them, something that shouldn't be there. A childhood home, a deceased family member, a place that held deep personal meaning. And then they'd write about landing to investigate. The entries would end there, mid-sentence sometimes, as if the pilot had simply stopped writing and walked away. Ray had been rescued before he could explore the valley fully. His emergency beacon had worked, and a helicopter had pulled him out within 6 hours. But he'd taken one of the logbooks with him, smuggled it out against regulations. He still had it, he said, and he'd show it to me if I really wanted to know what happened to my brother. I said yes. The logbook belonged to a pilot named Sarah Chen. The entries were dated from June of 1987. Standard flight notes for the first dozen pages. Weather conditions, fuel levels, navigation coordinates. Then the entries started changing, becoming more personal, more confused. Sarah wrote about seeing her grandmother, this farm below her, even though the flight plan had her nowhere near Montana. She described circling lower, trying to understand what she was seeing. The farm looked exactly as she remembered it from childhood visits. The red barn, the white fence, even her grandmother standing in the yard, waving up at her. The final entry was just 4 words. Going down to visit. That was it. Sarah Chen had landed her plane in that valley and walked away, leaving everything behind. Ray told me there was no record of her ever being found. No missing person report that led anywhere. She simply ceased to exist after writing those 4 words. I asked Ray where the valley was. He was quiet for a long time, his weathered hands wrapped around his empty beer glass. Then he told me he couldn't give me exact coordinates, but he could describe the landmarks. The three peaks that formed a triangle. The glacier that looked like a frozen river. The way the afternoon sun hit the valley at just the right angle to make the aircraft glint like fallen stars. He also told me not to go looking for it. Told me that whatever was in that valley was still there, still calling to pilots, still making them see things that weren't real. Told me Jake was gone, and I'd just be adding myself to the list of missing people if I tried to find him. I thanked Ray for the information and left the bar. 2 days later, I hired a pilot. His name was Marcus Webb. He was younger than Ray, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of confidence that came from never having truly failed at anything. I told him I wanted to explore the Wrangell Mountains, photograph the glaciers, the standard tourist package. I didn't. He mentioned the valley. Didn't. He mentioned Jake. Marcus agreed without much interest. Just another job, just another client wanting to see Alaska from the air. We flew out on a Tuesday morning. The weather was clear, visibility unlimited. Marcus kept up a steady stream of commentary about the terrain below us, the wildlife, the geological features. I barely listened. I was scanning the landscape, looking for Ray's landmarks. The three peaks, the frozen river glacier. I found them 90 minutes into the flight. I pointed them out to Marcus, asked if we could circle that area. He banked the plane without questioning it, probably assuming I spotted a good photo opportunity. As we came around the peaks, I saw it, the valley, hidden in the shadows of the surrounding mountains, invisible unless you were at exactly the right angle. And the planes, dozens of them, maybe more, small aircraft scattered across the valley floor like discarded toys. Marcus saw them too. His easy commentary stopped abruptly. I could see his knuckles go white on the controls. For a moment, I thought he was going to turn around, fly us back to Anchorage and pretend he'd never seen anything. But pilots are curious by nature. They can help themselves. He took us lower. As we descended, the details became clearer. The planes were in remarkable condition. No rust, no significant weather damage. They sat on their landing gear as if they'd been parked there yesterday, not years or decades ago. I could see registration numbers on some of them. Tail markings. One plane still had a faded advertisement on its fuselage. Marcus was breathing differently now. Faster, shallower. I asked him if he was okay. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on something below us. Something I couldn't see yet. Then I saw it too. There was a house in the valley. Not a cabin or a shelter. A full suburban house. 2 stories. White siding. Black shutters. A driveway leading to nothing. It looked exactly like a house that had been plucked from some neighborhood in the lower 48 and dropped into this impossible valley in the Alaska wilderness. Marcus said something under his breath. I asked him to repeat it. He told me that was his childhood home. The house where he grew up in Portland. The house that burned down when he was 12 years old. I felt my stomach drop. This was how it started. This was what the logbooks described. I told Marcus we needed to leave. We needed to turn around right now and get out of this valley. He nodded, but his hands didn't move on the controls. We kept descending. I told him again, louder this time. We had to go. Whatever he was seeing wasn't real. It was some kind of trick. Some phenomenon that made pilots see things. Marcus nodded again, and this time he did pull up on the controls. But nothing happened. The plane kept descending, smooth and steady, like we were on a glide path to an invisible runway. Marcus started working the controls frantically. Throttle, stick, rudder pedals. Nothing responded. The engine was running normally. All the instruments showed green. But the plane was flying itself, taking us down into the valley whether we wanted to go or not. We landed with barely a bump. Perfect touchdown. The kind of landing instructors use as examples. Marcus cut the engine immediately, as if that would make a difference. We sat in silence, our breath fogging the windows, neither of us wanting to acknowledge what had just happened. I looked out at the other planes. From ground level, they seemed even more surreal. A graveyard of perfectly preserved aircraft, all sitting patiently in neat rows. Waiting, I could see into some of the cockpits. Empty pilot seats, control panels dark. A few had their doors hanging open. Marcus was staring at the house. His house, the one that shouldn't exist. I could see his hand reaching for the door handle. I grabbed his wrist and told him no, whatever he was seeing wasn't real. It was bait, a lure. The valley was showing him what he wanted most, and if he got out of this plane, he'd end up like all the other pilots who landed here. He looked at me with eyes that didn't quite focus. He told me I didn't understand. His sister had died in that fire when he was 12. He He spent 23 years wondering if he could have saved her, if he missed some sign, some chance to get her out. And now she was in that house. He could see her in the upstairs window. She was alive and she was waiting for him. I held onto his wrist tighter, told him it wasn't real. Couldn't to be real. Marcus tried to pull away, but I, bigger than him, stronger. We struggled in the confined cockpit space, both of us knowing that if he got that door open, I'd probably never see him again. Then I made a mistake. I looked out my own window, and I saw something impossible. Jake was standing beside the plane, my brother, wearing his favorite leather jacket and that crooked smile he always had. He looked exactly as I remembered him, exactly as he looked 3 months ago before he disappeared. He waved at me, the same casual wave he'd given me 1,000 times. "Come on," the wave said. "Let's go. Stop messing around." My hand loosened on Marcus' wrist. Everything Ray had told me, everything I learned about the valley, it all seemed distant and unimportant compared to the fact that my brother was right there. Right outside, not dead, not gone, just waiting for me to stop being stubborn and get out of the plane. Marcus yanked his wrist free. I heard his door open, heard him climbing out, but I wasn't paying attention anymore. I was reaching for my own door handle. My eyes locked on Jake, my mind filling with relief and joy and a desperate need to hug my little brother and tell him everything was going to be okay. My hand touched the door handle. The metal was cold even through my glove. And in that moment of contact, something changed. It was like touching a live wire, a jolt of clarity that cut through whatever fog had been filling my head. Jake wasn't there. I knew that with absolute certainty. Jake was gone. The thing outside my window, wearing his face and his jacket and his smile, wasn't my brother. It was something else, something that knew exactly what I wanted to see, exactly what would make me open that door and step out into the valley. I pulled my hand back, looked away from the window, focused on the instrument panel in front of me, using the familiar dials and gauges to anchor myself in reality. I could hear Marcus outside, his footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. Walking away from the plane, walking toward his impossible house and his sister who died 23 years ago. I didn't look to see if Jake was still there. Didn't let myself check. I knew if I looked again, I might not be able to resist. Instead, I climbed into the pilot seat, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the controls. I'd never flown a plane before. I sat in enough cockpits as a passenger to recognize the basic controls, but I had no training, no experience, no real idea what I was doing. But I also knew I had maybe seconds before whatever controlled this valley decided to pull me out of the plane by force. I hit the starter. The engine coughed, sputtered, caught. The propeller spun to life. I pushed the throttle forward, released what I hoped was the brake, and the plane started moving. Too fast, bouncing over the uneven ground. I had no idea how to steer, how to control the speed, how to do anything except point the nose away from the house Marcus had vanished into. The plane picked up speed. I pulled back on the stick, remembering that was how you made planes go up. Nothing happened. We kept rolling, faster now, heading straight for a line of abandoned aircraft at the far end of the valley. I pulled harder. The nose lifted slightly, then dropped again. I was going to crash, going to add my plane to the collection, going to become another mystery for someone else to investigate. But at least I did crash. At least I did die in a comprehensible way instead of walking into the mountains after a hallucination. The wheels left the ground, just for a second, a small hop that gave me maybe 3 feet of clearance. But it was enough to clear the wing of a Cessna in front of me. Then we were back down, bouncing hard, my teeth clacking together. I pulled back again, desperate now, and this time the plane responded. The nose came up, the wheels lost contact with the ground and stayed lost. We climbed, too steep. The plane was shuddering, the engine straining. I knew enough to know that was bad, that you could stall a plane by climbing too aggressively. I pushed the stick forward slightly. The nose dropped. We continued climbing, but at a safer angle. I got us over the peaks surrounding the valley through sheer luck and terror. Once we cleared them, the plane suddenly became responsive again. The controls worked normally. The engine smoothed out. It was like passing through an invisible barrier between one world and another. I had no idea how to navigate, no idea how to find my way back to Anchorage. I followed what looked like a river, kept the sun on my right, and prayed. 2 hours later, I spotted a small airport I didn't recognize. I brought the plane down in what was probably the worst landing in aviation history. Bounced 4 times, nearly went off the runway. Finally came to a stop with the nose pointed at the terminal building. Ground crew came running. They pulled me out of the cockpit, checked me for injuries, asked 100 questions I couldn't answer. Where was my pilot? Where had I come from? What was my license number? I told them there'd been an accident. Told them to call search and rescue. Told them coordinates I memorized from the flight plan. They sent helicopters. Spent 3 days searching the area I indicated. Found nothing. No valley. No abandoned planes. No Marcus Webb. The search and rescue coordinator told me I must have been confused. Possibly hypothermic. Definitely in shock. The mountains played tricks on people. Made them see things that weren't there. I didn't argue. What could I say? That I found a valley full of ghost planes and left my pilot there to chase his dead sister? That something in those mountains had worn my brother his face and tried to lure me to my death. They put me in a psychiatric hold. I flew back to Seattle 2 days later. Went back to my job. Back to my apartment. Back to a normal life that felt like a photograph of a life rather than the real thing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I left something important in that valley. Not Marcus, not Jake, something else. Some part of myself that had looked at my dead brother and wanted so badly for him to be real that I almost opened that door. I dream about the valley every night. In my dreams, I always open the door. Always step out into the cold. Always walk toward Jake, who's waiting with that crooked smile. And I never wake up. I just keep walking deeper into the mountains, following my brother home, while behind me the plane sits empty on the frozen ground. One more mystery in a valley full of them. The FAA investigated Marcus' disappearance. Concluded he suffered some kind of medical emergency during flight, possibly a stroke or heart attack. They found his plane eventually crashed in a different part of the Wrangles, far from where I told them to search. The cockpit was empty. The logbook was gone. They blamed me for panicking, for giving them bad coordinates, for probably making everything worse with my interference. I let them blame me. It was easier than the truth. Sometimes I wonder about the other pilots, the ones who landed in that valley over the years. What did they see? What impossible thing called them down? Were they happy when they walked away from their planes? Or did some part of them know it was wrong? Know they were following something that wore a familiar face but had nothing human underneath? I wonder if Marcus found his sister. If Jake found whatever he was looking for when he landed his plane 3 months before I came searching for him. I wonder if they together somewhere in those mountains. All the missing pilots, living in their impossible memories while their planes sit empty in a valley that doesn't exist. I still have his beer-stained logbook, the one from Sarah Chen. I keep it in a fireproof box in my closet. Sometimes I take it out and read those final words. Going down to visit. 4 words that ended a life, or transformed it, or did something I done to have language to describe. I think about adding my own entry. David Brenner, the pilot who almost landed, the brother who almost followed, the man who saw home and turned away. But I don't to have a plane anymore. Done to have a license or training or any right to call myself a pilot. I just have a story that no one believes and a compass in my head that always points back to those mountains. The valley is still there. Still calling. Still showing people what they want most and making them land. Somewhere in Alaska, right now, a pilot is circling lower, trying to understand what they see below. A house, a person, a memory made solid, and they rethinking about landing. Just for a minute, just to check it out. Just to see if maybe, impossibly, the thing they lost has been waiting for them all along. And somewhere in Alaska, right now, another plane is joining the graveyard. Another cockpit is going empty. Another logbook is recording its final entry. The valley that calls pilots home is always hungry. Always patient. Always perfect at showing you exactly what you need to see to make you land. And once you land, once you step out of that cockpit into the cold mountain air, you never leave. You just walk into the wilderness following your heart, its deepest wish, and you disappear. That's what happened to Jake. That's what happened to Marcus. That's what will happen to the next pilot and the one after that. Because the valley is still there, hidden in the Wrangles, waiting for someone to find it at exactly the right angle, exactly the right moment. And the terrible thing, the thing that keeps me awake at night, is that I know exactly where it is. I could draw a map. I could lead people there. But who would I save? The valley shows you what you need to see. If you be flying over those mountains looking for something you've lost, you'll find it. And you LL land. And you, LL walk away. Just like everyone else. Just like my brother. Just like someday, probably, like me. Because I think about going back. Every single day, I think about it. Not to rescue anyone. Not to expose the truth. But because some part of me never stopped seeing Jake standing outside that plane, waving at me. Smiling that crooked smile. Some part of me still wants to open that door. Still wants to follow him home. Even if home is a lie. Even if it means leaving everything behind. The valley is patient. It knows I'll come back eventually. They always do. The pilots who escape, the ones who resist, they always return. Because once they've seen what the valley can show you. Once they looked at your deepest wish made manifest. Nothing in the real world ever quite compares. You spend the rest of your life knowing that somewhere in the Wrangell Mountains, in a valley that doesn't exist, your heart's desire is waiting. And sooner or later, that knowledge becomes unbearable. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know the truth before I go back. And I will go back. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually, because the valley has already won. It won the moment I saw Jake standing there. The moment I wanted it to be real so badly that I almost believed it was. That is the valley, is real power. Not showing you illusions, but showing you that the boundary between what you've lost and what you want is thinner than you thought. That maybe, just maybe, if you were willing to leave everything else behind, you can have it back. You can go home. And who could resist that? Who can live knowing home is waiting, if only you were brave enough or desperate enough or broken enough to land? Not me. Not anymore. The valley has me. It's just a matter of time before I acknowledge it and point my plane toward those 3 peaks, that frozen river, that hidden graveyard where dozens of pilots have already found what they were looking for. Where my brother is waiting. Where I, LL, finally stop running from the truth. Where I, LL, open the door and step out into the cold and walk toward the one thing I want more than safety or sanity or life itself. I, LL, walk home. And I, LL, never come back. And someday, someone will find my plane sitting perfectly intact in that valley, with an empty cockpit and a logbook whose final entry reads exactly like all the others. 4 words that end everything and begin nothing. Going down to visit.